Today on the Servant Leadership Podcast, we're joined by Steve Carter, nationally recognized pastor, author, and one of the most respected communicators in the church today. Steve has preached on some of the largest stages in the country, led in high-profile ministry roles, and now serves as lead pastor of Christ Church of Oak Brook in the Chicago suburbs. Steve is best known for his ability to help leaders grow in both character and communication, guiding them to lead from a place of integrity, emotional honesty, and spiritual depth. In this episode, he shares what it looks like to stay grounded, lead through pain, and build the kind of life that can withstand both pressure and success. Steve, thank you so much for being on the Servant Leadership Podcast.
Chris, I'm a big fan of you. We had the privilege to kind of partner in some exciting projects over the years, and it's just been so fun to watch the reach of this podcast and all that you are doing with your life. It's really, really inspiring. So thanks for having me.
I've been talking about getting you on here since I even started before the podcast launched, and I was first recording episodes. So this is super special that you're willing and able to do this. Your journey here has been unconventional. And now you are helping lead a major church in the western suburbs. Talk about your journey to even get into pastoring.
Yeah. I was a film major, and so I've always been captured by the idea of telling stories. My dad went to USC for cinematography, and so we talked a lot about film growing up. He was a business guy, but I found myself on my 19th birthday getting to baptize my dad. And so he came to faith, and he felt as if God kind of shared to him, hey, sell everything and move to Grand Rapids. And we lived in Southern California. So it was kind of like this weird, wild move. But Grand Rapids was where he was from. And so we went back there, and I went with my parents, and I got connected to a church that was just starting. And this communicator who was preaching, I felt was as if he was like storyboarding his talks, and it was almost like a screenwriter. And the way that he was unpacking the scripture, it just made so much sense. And I remember just going, I want to do that. And that just kind of began this little journey, and was in California at a church, was in Chicago in a church, been traveling, teaching over the years at different churches and writing books. And then I had this opportunity to come to Christ Church of Oak Brook. And it's kind of, for me, been one of the healthiest churches in Chicagoland. They've had two pastors in 60 years. My predecessor, Dan Meyer, is just as good as they come. And he had been a real friend and mentor over the years for me personally. And so when this opportunity came, it just it felt like ordained. It just felt, even with the role, like this feels like home. So,
yeah. So when you started getting into this, and you heard people preach in a different way, and you started moving church to church and kind of continuing to grow in your skills, was it intimidating ever being around such great leaders?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, everybody communicates, few connect. And the great leaders, and that's a John Maxwell quote, but the great leaders know how to connect to their audience, or connect to their staff, or pull out the best in them, or call them in and call them up. And you could get up there and transfer an idea. It's different speaking from a transformed place. And every place I went, I learned something new about leadership, about communication. And for me, I think it's been one of the blessings is most of the time I've always been the second or third best communicator on a team. And so it's been pretty like humbling in that way, but also really a gift, because it has allowed me to be around better communicators. And iron sharpens iron. And I think sometimes in leadership, people can get threatened by that. They'd rather go to a place where they can be the number one person. But there is something about being on a team that pushes you, challenges you, inspires you, helps you get better. And I've just been fortunate enough to have a bunch of mentors who have helped me get to where I am today. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for years, I sat under your teaching, and you were my pastor. And I saw both behind the scenes and from just sitting in the pews how amazing you are as a servant leader. One of the things that always struck me differently about you was that you felt like one of the people who were there, and you were just showing up to learn and soak it in and really be with people. How do you think, as people get success, like in your role, now you're leading a really large church in Chicago, how do people stay humble servant leaders versus just lead really well?
That's great. You know, when I was at Willow, I remember watching Bill Hybels. A bunch of us went after a meeting into the restroom. We were washing our hands, and there was water on the countertop. And I watched him grab a towel and clean the countertop. And I'd never seen a leader of an organization do that. It's just kind of like, that's why we have facilities people. And I just remember thinking, man, that's really, really important. It brought me back to when I was an intern and wanting to go into ministry. Part of my job for the church to help me with this internship and pay me was I had to do facilities. And one day my senior pastor walked in and saw me cleaning a restroom, and he said, if you can do this, you'll be ready for ministry and you'll be ready for leadership. Wow. If you can do this with an actual joyful spirit and heart and servant heart, you will be great at leadership and ministry. And I think I just took that. And as you gain success and you have opportunities, this is where you have to have spiritual formation practices that really remind you who you are. So once every 2 weeks, I walk the grounds of this place just to pick up trash outside because I saw mentors do that. But it's also, as you get higher up, it's easy for people to say, oh, you don't need to do that. There's something more important for you. And I don't need to do it. But for my soul, I need to do it. Yeah. For my ego, I need to do it. For keeping those roots close to the soil, that's where the idea of humility comes from. It's like the humus, the dirt, the ground, the soil. To keep that as fertile as possible, I need to do stuff like that. And so for me, it's been really intentional to, again, not to just do this to serve, but to actually protect me from me. And that's been a helpful thing. Sometimes when I'm at conferences and I'm speaking, the easiest thing is just to get on a plane and fly home, or you can help break down with the tech crew and break down the tables and the chairs. And those are little things, but they form us to not see ourselves as more important than we actually are. And I'm just one part of the body. I can open my mouth and talk and preach and speak and lead, but it doesn't make me any better than the hands or the eyes or the heart. I'm just one part of the body. So learning to not take myself so seriously.
So as people are listening, we often encourage people to step up and be big, do big things, be better leaders, grow in their leadership capabilities. And I mean, for years we've heard like everyone has influence, right? That was something that we used to talk about a lot. There's that happy balance. How do you teach people both to empower them to really lead and step up and also to serve? That's such a hard concept for people to grasp.
Yeah, well, 2 words have been really, really important for me, and it's craft and character. And it comes from this 1 Peter 4, where Paul's telling Timothy, his mentee, he said, hey, physical training is of some value, but godliness is useful in all things. And then he says, don't let anybody look down on you because you're young, but set an example. And he lists off 5 characteristics. And then he says, do not neglect your gift. Remember when the elders called that gift, devote yourself to the public reading of scripture and teaching and preaching. And then he said, give yourself fully to it so everyone may see your progress. So in a handful of verses, he's talking about character leading our craft. He puts that first. Dave Chappelle signs a $50 million contract with Comedy Central. It's episode 5, season 3. He says a joke and someone laughs a little too long and he just walks off set. And supposedly he calls his driver, ends up having him take him to the airport. He flies to South Africa, goes to a monastery, supposedly. And then he finds himself 6 months later on Oprah Winfrey's couch. And Oprah just asks him, why'd you do it, Dave? And I'll never forget, I remember being in a hotel and just flipping channels and seeing him on Oprah and just got this interview. And he said, he started crying and he just said, because success can take you places that character cannot sustain you. Yeah. And for me, I want to do and maximize and achieve and see incredible kingdom impact. But as Jesus once said, what good is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul or forfeit your soul? So I think for me, it's how am I growing in my craft, in my leadership, in my communication? But I better be putting the same kind of emphasis, if not even more so, on my character. Because you might get into boardrooms that are, difficult issues, things where you can kind of fudge the truth here or there. And if you don't have that character set up, it's gonna take you down. And we've seen this in every arena: politics, athletics, marketplace. And I think part of that servant leadership is recognizing, man, I can only give away what I've poured in or allowed to be poured into me. And so that's been really, really important for me over the years.
Well, and you even started a podcast around that, right? Talk about the podcast and how that came to be.
Yeah, so basically it's all centered around communication, so helping people get better at the craft. But then I interview different thought leaders or communicators, and then the last 20 minutes we'll ask them, hey, help me understand how you are focusing time on your character. What does that look like? And it's amazing to hear the varying answers from a John Mark Comer to, a Scott McKnight to, Tara Beth Leach. I mean, there's all these various people who have different ways at which God is teaching them and shaping them so that they can finish the race well. And that's the hope of every leader. Nobody sets out to go, what I want to do is just blow up my life in my mid 40s, but it happens, and that's where we have to be really, really, as my mentor, Mike Volkema once said, you have to be deliberately intentional. And I said to him, isn't that the same word twice? And he's like, exactly. So on the character front, one of the books you wrote was The Thing Beneath the Thing. And that speaks a lot to character and just personal development. Talk about how that book came to be and what you learned through the process of writing it, and then also what you think are good takeaways from the book. Yeah, so The Thing Beneath the Thing all was grounded out of a simple question. Why do we do what we do? Which actually the Apostle Paul, who writes the majority of the New Testament, shares in Romans 7:15. He says, I do not understand what I do. The good I want to do, I just don't do. But the thing I hate, I do. And every time I forget to do something that my wife asks me, that's the verse I quote. Babe, I'm sorry. I do not understand what I do. And she'll typically just say, well, figure it out. Why didn't you pick the cleaners up? Or why did you forget this? Or why didn't you finish this task? And that just kind of led me to start to wonder, wow, there is a lot of train wrecks that happen in leadership. And there's a lot of collateral damage that can often happen. Why do we do what we do? Because nobody sets out one day and goes, man, here's the day that I'm going to decimate my character. Here's the day that I'm going to train wreck every relationship. But it happens. And so what I realized was in the city of Chicago, there are potholes. Nobody told me about them. I came from Southern California. They told me about deep dish pizza and the Cubs and Wrigley and Soldier Field, all that. Nobody told me about potholes. And I remember driving over a pothole once and getting a flat tire. And I had heard that there was a 3-digit number, 311, and that you could report a pothole. And if you reported the pothole and the city of Chicago had not fixed it in due time, they would pay for the damages to your vehicle. Oh, wow. So I call this number. This woman picks up and she shares a little bit like, oh, I'm sorry, Steve, you're the first one to report this pothole. And so the teacher in me was like, you have your own 3-digit number? How many potholes do you all fill in? And she's like, well, the Chicago Tribune just did a story on us in the last 100 days. You want to know how many? And we go back and forth, and she finally tells me 130,000 potholes in 100 days. And if you Google right now, the city of Chicago pothole tracker, they actually track their work on their city website. So when they come up to a pothole, it's caused by inclement weather. Water freezes the asphalt's not like our sweatpants. It creates this. And they typically will see that this happens. They add some asphalt and they move on to the next one. But sometimes there's something else happening underneath the surface. It could be a leaky sewage pipe or erosion. And if they don't deal with that pothole correctly, that pothole will become a sinkhole. And this has happened in the city of Chicago. It's happened in pretty much every state and every country. And it's millions of dollars of damage. And the truth is, just being human and being a leader, working with broken and beautiful people, we are a collection of potholes. And every single day, somebody gets close and drives over one of those potholes. And that's a wound that we all have. And oftentimes when someone gets close to that pothole, what ends up happening is all this energy races through our body and it has to go somewhere. And so the thing beneath the thing is really trying to prevent our potholes from becoming sinkholes, but also helping us become more aware of why we do what we do. And T.H.I.N.G is an acronym. And so the T is triggers. You're first going to get triggered. Someone's going to come over that pothole. And the trigger is the setup that sets us off. And that's typically going to lead us one of four places: to a hideout, which is the H, which is the metaphorical places we go to escape, to soothe, to help us get regulated. And that could be work, it could be food, it could be something socially more unacceptable. But it's a myriad of things. And every one of us is an addict in some capacity. The I is insecurity. Sometimes someone gets close to that trigger and we're reminded of a lie that someone spoke over us. You're not a good leader. You've never been a leader. Who do you think you are? Your brother would never mess up like this. Your sister would never do this. And all of a sudden, that insecurity has us powered down. For some of us, when we get triggered, we don't go to a hideout or insecurity. We go to a narrative and we create false stories about another person. And it's just gossip. It's just like Plato theology, where we begin to shape and form someone or a group of people and say, this is who they are. And we get other people to buy into it. And what I've come to realize is throughout the scriptures is the only way to heal those potholes so that they don't become sinkholes, to actually become someone who's whole, holy, and spiritually healthy, is we got to allow grace into those wounds. And for me, Dallas Willard once said that grace is opposed to earning, but never opposed to effort. And it takes effort. It takes effort to sit with the pain. It takes effort to get curious of why we do what we do, and to kind of play it back and go, wow, this wasn't really about that staff person. This was actually about something that happened in my childhood. This wasn't really about my wife. This was about something that happened at work, and beginning to be aware of that so that the good we want to do, we can actually do.
Yeah. Some people might look at you and think you're so young, and for the roles and positions you've had from a leadership standpoint, it was just easy. I mean, you must be an amazing leader, because from early on in your 20s and your 30s, like you just led really big things. And I think this is such an interesting concept because there's so many challenges that people don't see behind the scenes. And that's one of the things that you kind of talk about. You also have a book called Grieve, Breathe, and Receive. And it kind of continues that thinking. How did that come about? What pains were there, and why is that book so important for people?
Yeah, well, I think many of us don't know how to grieve. And honestly, I knew how to achieve. I didn't know how to grieve. And much of the success that I had experienced early on in ministry actually gave me a reason not to grieve. I was winning over here. Why would I want to stop and deal with this? But again, if I'm going to have my character lead the way, you have to make time for that. But I would say Grieve, Breathe, Receive came out of a season of loss. And I actually went through a profound loss. It was my dream job. And some stuff came out about a mentor, and it just led to one thing after another. But I ended up resigning, and in the resignation, I didn't know what to do next. But I felt like the Lord say to me a few weeks after some of the dust had settled after the resignation, go to the desert and wait for instructions. And I didn't think it was literal. I just thought it was like metaphorical. Like, don't rush to the next thing. But the next morning I told my wife what I had sensed the Lord saying, and And she just teared up and she said, I've been sensing the same thing. I want to go home. And she's from Arizona. And so we moved to Arizona, and Eugene Peterson, this great thought leader, pastor, would often say that all theology is grounded and rooted in topography, meaning your city or your area has something to teach you about how you understand God. And this is what the desert mothers and fathers understood, centuries ago, that the desert, the deserted place, has something to teach us and remind us about grief and about healing and about redemption. And it's that in-between reality from Egypt, where their oppression was, and the promised land. And so learning from the desert mothers and fathers, going to the desert, fortifying character, learning how to grieve, it just changed me. If the thing beneath the thing was the question, why do we do what we do? Grieve, breathe, receive. The question is, what do you do when life does what it does, when it shocks you? And as a leader, you're going to be surprised. You're going to be shocked. You're going to have stuff that shows up on your doorstep that you did not want to see happen. And it hurts. And how do we deal with that? And so this was my best chance of unpacking what the desert taught me to help anybody else who might find themselves kind of in a season of change. And literally my definition for grief is just honoring what comes up when change shows up. And you can have good change, like if your kids are going off to college and you're an empty nester, that's change. It could be good change. Your kids are turning 27, and so they're off your insurance. That's good change, you know what I mean? And so I think it's not just all bad, but learning to have good grief and learning to actually have a good process for how we handle grief, because especially with high capacity leaders, it's way, way, way more easy to achieve than to grieve.
Well, it is easy to just ignore what else is going on. It's really easy to focus on the success and the drive. What does the breathe and the receive look like for a really good leader?
Yeah. So you remember when we were kids and you're riding your bike or your skateboard and you kind of fall on the asphalt and all of a sudden like you skin your knee, it's bleeding, and you come in and your mom sees it and she pulls out that ugly brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide and pours it on your knee, and it gets all white and pussy, and you clean it off, put a Band-Aid over it, and you're back out riding your bike or skateboarding. And the next day they do it again. Hydrogen peroxide, put the Band-Aid on, and you keep doing that till it heals. And I think sometimes for high capacity leaders, we think, oh man, do I have to spend 9 hours in my grief? Do I have to what do I do? And what I learned in that breathe and that receive was to actually just spend some 10 minutes with my grief. Just to almost have a moment of just, all right, this happened. And some of it looked like forgiveness. Some of it looked like me learning how to forgive. Some of it looked like just me kind of saying, oh man, I miss those people, or I miss that situation, or I miss the opportunities I had. And you have to sit with that. You can't, as you said, and I think it's a great word, not ignore it. You've got to face it. And then the receive is actually beginning to experience the surprise of Sunday. And in kind of a biblical context, what we know as Holy Weekend, Good Friday. Jesus was perfect. He was holy. He was amazing. He got what he didn't deserve. Yeah. And if he got what he didn't deserve, then all of us are going to get what we don't deserve. And what ends up happening is we find ourselves in grief, and then scholars will talk about Silent Saturday, which is kind of like the desert. It's just trying to get through grief. And typically we're either going to waste the weight, we're going to hate the weight, or we can learn to win the weight and lean in and see what this has to teach us to prepare us for the surprise of Sunday. Those first disciples had no idea Jesus was going to resurrect. And so when we do the good character work, we actually are preparing ourselves for the surprise of Sunday. And, I released Grieve, Breathe, Receive, and I didn't know that this job was on even the even an opportunity. Obviously God did, but to be able to have the surprise of this opportunity has made the desert feel profoundly worth it, and makes me actually believe Romans 8:28. God does work all things together for the good of those who believe. Even when you feel like you're in the desert, even when you feel like you have to go through your own version of Good Friday or Egypt, he's still working on your behalf. So don't give up, leaders. Don't give up.
So you've talked a lot over the years about character and the importance of being a high character leader. That means a lot of different things to people. Well, one, how do you spot leaders? How do you decide, do they actually have high character, or are they a person of character? And what steps do you encourage people to take in order to build better character or fortify their character, as you've talked about?
The original concept of the word character was that you had been marked. There was a distinct, almost branding, or you were in some object had been engraved with something. And then it became, over time, what are the distinctive marks of a person, their ethical, moral, mental decisions that actually have built this character, this person to who they are today. My grandfather is buried at West Point. And 100 plus years ago, there was a prayer that was introduced at West Point. Every cadet memorized this prayer for over 100 years. It's known as the cadet's prayer. It's so stunning. But in that it says, may we choose the harder right over the lesser wrong. May we live above the common level of life. And there's all of these phrases in that prayer that I realize, the harder right. Do we choose that? As a leader, I'm constantly watching. Does someone downplay or diminish their spouse or another staff person to try to make themselves look better? Do they exaggerate? Do they just, in the midst of difficult issues, go more self-preservation? Or do they actually lead with a sense of vulnerability? And not just lead with a faux vulnerability, as Chuck DeGroat says, but the kind of vulnerability that says, I'm going to do something about it. It's one thing to say I'm an addict. It's another thing to go to AA, Right. And so I don't expect people to be perfect. I just want to make sure that, are they aware of their blind spots, and what are they doing about that? Whether that's surrounding themselves with teammates who are masters at their blind spots, or if they have a coach that is helping them actually get better in those areas. And so you have to be observant as a leader. I'm constantly both a talent scout, a coach, but I'm looking with just great intent to see how someone chooses to respond when they think no one's watching.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately is this concept of leaders, and yourself included, get a lot of interesting opportunities. And one of the things that I've seen identify great leaders versus really good leaders is great leaders figure out a way to leave behind some of the really good opportunities that come their way and wait for the best opportunities or the great things that they feel called to do. How have you seen that play out? And is that something that is actually real, or is that just like a thought?
I think it is real.
Okay.
And I think it's a really great thought. I think the curiosity that you have with that question showcases that it's not often demonstrated.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is, I think one way to define poverty is a lack of options. When you have fewer and fewer options, sometimes the pressure feels like, I just got to take this, or I just got to do this. But when you have kind of this space to actually be able to be in touch with your desire, to name your desire. In 2021, I wrote in my journal the kind of dream I have if I was to be a lead pastor, what I would like. I just started rattling all this stuff off. I found it a month after I stepped into this job, and it's like uncanny how similar, like 96% of it is like spot on. And I said things like, I don't want to follow a founder. I want to follow someone who followed a founder. I wanted, like, there were certain pieces I deliberately spoke in, and there were many great opportunities that came my way. They just weren't the right opportunities. And that's part of the harder right. They would have been a right choice. I just don't think they would have been the best choice. And that waiting game is hard, because you keep wondering, like, am I gonna have the opportunity? Is God gonna open the door? Is this gonna be it? But Acts 15 is the greatest theological discussion of the day, and they come to their decision, and when they're asked about it, they said, it just seemed good to the Spirit in us. And I think you have to be so in tune to that intuitive spirit that's within us, as well as our longings and desires. And when you can actually go through a healthy clearness committee with friends who ask you great questions, and you can discern it together, it just helps you realize, oh, this is the opportunity. That's not saying the other opportunities aren't good ones. It's just not the right one for me and the unique offense or unique leadership style or capacity that I have.
Yeah. Well, with that, you've talked about there's been different mentors and people speak into your life. How do you encourage people to engage in the mentorship process or to be mentored? Like, what are the steps to actually get that great sounding board advice where then you have people you can talk to about, is this a good thing for me or is this a great thing for me?
Yeah. Well, I love, again, in that 1 Timothy 4 passage, he says, be so devoted to your gift that everyone sees your progress. When I get into my 50s, I want to be a better communicator than I am in my 40s. When I get into my 60s, I want to be a wildly better leader than I was in my 50s. When I get into my 70s, I still hope they're letting me preach. And I want to be better because there's more wisdom. But that only can happen is if you allow and give permission to people to speak into your life. And I don't believe in just one mentor. I believe more, as it's been said before, a constellation of mentors. And I typically will have 5 at a time. I budget money towards it. I budget time towards it. And I'm not afraid to be rejected. And I've been rejected by a lot of people where I'm like, hey, I'd love to learn from you around finance, or I'd love to learn from you around leadership, or I'd love to learn from you around communication. And some people are like, hey, I just don't have the time. That's okay. It's not personal. But I am only responsible for me making the ask. Second thing I would say is, when you ask a mentor or ask someone to mentor you, be uber clear. What are you looking for? Because sometimes they could just perceive like, oh man, this person's going to want all of this time. I typically will say, hey, I would love one 90-minute conversation for once a month for the next 6 months. I'll bring all my questions around communication or just leadership or organizational leadership. This is just, you're an expert in this area. And I think if I had that time with you over 6 months, I'll pay for whatever meal you want. I'll pay for whatever drink you, like wherever will feel comfortable. I'll come to you, or we can do it via Zoom. But then I show up with my questions. What it does is it gives you a time frame, so it doesn't feel like this person's committed forever, because high capacity, incredible leaders, they don't know what the next 2 years are going to look like. And so by putting that on and being clear about what I want, it gives them a chance to understand my intentions. And then that typically helps them go discern for themselves if this is something they want to do or not do. The other thing I would say is always be grateful. Always be grateful. And you don't always have to shoot for the Fortune 100 CEOs or leaders. Start with people that are in your that kind of your sphere of influence. People that you respect. Maybe they might be a seasoned employee in the marketplace. They might be a friend of a family member. But begin to practice asking great questions around a specific topic. And whether in your notes app, on your phone, or in your journal, whenever a question comes up around that topic, write it down so that when you get to meet with a mentor, you already have a catalog of great questions. And the better your questions are, because all a question is a quest to learn, a quest to grow, a quest to be curious. The better your questions are, the better the learning will be.
Yeah. It's so interesting on both of those points. On your first thing about finding mentors, I got given the same advice, maybe by the same person, of write down every area of your life that you care about. And now think through who's the best person at just that thing, and only talk to them about that thing. Don't talk to them about other stuff. So if you want to be a great dad, find the best dad ever and just take them out and ask them questions about being a dad, right? And so that's been such a helpful construct for me to think through the mentors in my life and who I want to surround myself with. On the flip side, sometimes it's hard when being asked, like a person in your position, let's say, and leaders who are listening to this just thinking, gosh, I just don't have capacity. What happens when somebody asks you, hey, Steve, can you help me? Can you mentor me? Because if you said yes to everyone that's asking you for help, you wouldn't actually have time to do anything.
Yep.
So how do you balance that well? I know that's a tough question.
Yeah. Well, so again, this is a muscle that we have to work out in my mind. And when I've experienced the mentoring that I have had, and I am only where I am because of, God's kindness and the people that have poured into me and given me opportunities that I didn't deserve. Well, I have a chance to pay that forward. Yeah. And the question now is, will I? Will I make margin in my schedule for some young punk like that guy was in 18 asking all these dumb questions that I thought were the most important questions, but someone was kind and patient and safe and consistent for me. And that helped me. So I always forget if it's Arthur Brooks or David Brooks. But one of them talks about you actually live longer when you are pouring into other people. And that doesn't just have to be something you do in your 60s and your 70s. That could always start when you're in your 20s and you're pouring into high school students or college students. Or you're in your 30s and you're pouring into just a younger marketplace leader, or someone in your 40s pouring into someone in their 30s that is just having their first kids and starting out. I think the more that we build that muscle, the more we start to look for it. And here's the truth is, when you have those kinds of relationships where you've poured into, you're actually not only just expanding your influence, because now I have communicators that I've been able to pour into that are preaching all over our country. My influence isn't just here. It's now shaping all of these different communities. My name's never mentioned, and I don't want it to be. But I almost, as like a proud dad, I'm like, I love watching that woman or that man just speak and preach and see the kingdom advance. The other piece about it too that I think is really, really beautiful is, when you do this, you also get younger too. So you live longer, but you get younger, because all of a sudden you start to realize, wow, that's how Gen Z thinks. That's fascinating. I'm so connected to how Gen Xers or boomers think. Oh, wow, that's how millennials think. And not to shame or put shade on that, but to lead with curiosity and to really help, you're going to get younger emotionally and mentally. And I think it's going to allow you to connect with not just your generation, but with multiple generations.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is unique to you, and I'm wondering if this is just something that comes natural or something that you've learned, but sitting in meetings with you, having just seen you in so many different circumstances, you listen really well. And you don't listen to respond with a thought that's in your head. You listen with the thought of learning. And so often, I think I'll sit in a conversation and I'll be listening to somebody, but I'm really excited to say something back. I'm really thinking about, how am I going to formulate my thought back? And you listen to learn and reflect, and you do it in a different way. And it's actually a skill that I appreciate about you. Is that just easy and natural? Did you learn that? Do you even see that?
No, that's really kind. I think I wasn't very good at that. I think I was someone who just wanted to come across as smarter or like a better leader or whatever, and so sometimes even out of my own insecurity, I would talk over someone, or out of efficiency, talk over someone and just try to move something forward. And then I started to realize, like, oh, what can be gained when someone feels full safety. And I always say trust is a mathematical formula. Safe plus consistent again and again, over and over on repeat makes you worthy of trust. And if you think about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, Lencioni talks about when there's an absence of trust, you're going to have the fear of conflict, the lack of commitment, the avoidance of accountability, and the inattention to results. Well, if you can't listen well, you're not coming across as safe. And what ends up happening is it actually diminishes someone from saying, if I ever disagreed, I don't think it will be heard. I don't think I can bring this to that person, which then affects their commitment to the organization or the mission. And for me, I just realized, wow, when someone can feel heard, they might not agree with what my final decision was, but at least they felt respected in the dignity of being heard for their point. And it makes it easier for them to kind of stack hands once we leave the boardroom and go, okay, we're going to do it this way. Then if they already had their mind made up. They already knew what they were going to do.
So not only are you a great leader, in my opinion, a great servant leader, but you've been able to sit under lots of servant leaders, like you've talked about. What do you think is the biggest takeaway you've had from some of these leaders you've been sitting under?
My favorite leader that I've ever worked under was the former CEO of Herman Miller, and his name was Mike Volkema. And I think he's arguably just a phenomenal, in Jim Collins' language, level 5 leader. And I remember asking him about level 5 leaders, and he said they exist. Oftentimes in Fortune 100 companies, it's hard to do that. You only have 12 days off, a year. You're having to push. It's hard to be a great family man. It's hard to do all that stuff. He said, but there's a lot of them in the Fortune 300 and 400 companies because they just decided this is enough that I need to make, and I can still coach my kids' soccer team. Yeah. And I think it's all it really is wrestling down, what does contentment look like? What is your priorities? How much is enough? What do you actually want, written in your eulogy, as David Brooks talks about? Like, when you begin to think about that and glean from leaders who embody that, it just gives you a bit of a roadmap to say, I want to be more like that than that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Steve, I want to finish with 10 rapid fire questions where you just say the first thing that comes to mind, no wrong answers. Okay. Who's the first person you think of when I say servant leadership?
Jesus.
All right. Favorite book or movie?
Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard.
All right. Favorite food?
Mexican food.
Ooh. What's an interesting fact about you? Or surprising fact about you?
Surprising fact. I played college basketball. Play's not the right word. I sat the bench, but I got free shoes. So
5 words that most describe you.
Kind, I hope, generous, connection, communicator, leader.
Favorite thing to do in your free time?
Hang with my wife and my kids.
Love that. Favorite place you've been?
Anywhere near water. I love the ocean. So, Cabo, California.
Somewhere you want to go that you haven't been?
I want to go to Banff.
Nice.
In Canada. I don't know why. That just for some apparent reason, Banff and Patagonia are like places I want to go.
All right. Best advice you've ever received?
My dad told me when I brought a girl home once in college, he said, I asked him if he liked her and what he thought of her. And he said, everybody has crazy in their closet. You just have to figure out which crazy you can live with and not wake up every morning trying to fix or change. And I think not just every person has crazy, but every culture has crazy. And it's just helped me kind of make sense of, oh, this is my kind of crazy. I can handle this. And so.
That's great advice. My dad always told me, look at the whole, not the holes.
Ooh,
as well. Right?
I love
not all
that.
the issues, but look at the whole and what you're getting. Yeah.
Your dad is phenomenal. What a great man. What a great man.
Well, I'm so thankful you were on the podcast. A lot of people are going to want to hear more from you. They're going to want to learn from you. And with the podcast you're doing, talk about that and how people can find it, and also kind of some of the stuff, just how people can stay in touch.
Yep. So if you just went to stevecarter.org or on social media, it's just at Steve Ryan Carter, all one word. And then Craft and Character, the podcast, it could be found on all platforms.
Love it. Well, hopefully our listeners are going to tune in and start listening to the stuff you're doing too, because I've learned a lot from you and I'm so thankful for you.
Thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.